Beneath the marble floors of Vatican City, deeper than tourists ever imagine, lies a world that feels more like a myth than a library. The Vatican Archives, an underground labyrinth said to stretch for miles. Officially, it's a treasury of church history, papal bulls, royal letters, theological debates sealed in dust. But in the late-night whispers of Rome, it is something more, a vault of secrets too dangerous for daylight. Some who have stepped inside describe the silence as unnatural. Not the quiet of stone and paper, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest, as if the walls themselves are listening. Guards stand like statues, keys rattle in locks older than empires, and somewhere in that darkness, behind doors that may never open again, rummers say there are manuscripts that do not speak of saints or sinners, but of visitors. Not angels, not demons, something stranger, something from the stars. Imagine an ancient parchment, centuries old, describing beings that descend in light, communicating without words. Imagine a monk's trembling handwriting trying to explain the impossible. To call them angels would be safe. To call them aliens would be unthinkable. And so, the Church may have chosen silence. Whispers claim these writings were hidden, locked away, stamped with the Vatican's greatest seal of secrecy. For what would happen if humanity knew that Scripture may not stand alone, that perhaps the foundations of faith itself had visitors not from heaven, but from elsewhere? Think about it, if one page, just one, were revealed, what wars would it ignite? What hope or fear would it spread? Maybe that is why these documents sleep beneath Rome, undisturbed, while the world above forgets to ask what lies below. And yet the question lingers like a shadow across history. What if the Vatican's silence is not a denial, but a shield? Because some truths don't disappear when hidden, they wait. And if those visitors left instructions, what would happen if humanity ever read them? Long before telescopes pointed skyward, before Galileo risked everything to gaze through glass, there were maps, strange maps, scrolls that appeared in the Vatican's private collections, their ink fading, their parchment cracked, yet carrying a detail no one could explain. They showed constellations, stars that would not be discovered for centuries. Imagine standing in the candlelight of a papal chamber in the 1500s, a scholar unrolling a chart that marked not just the familiar belt of Orion, but stars invisible to the naked eye. Impossible stars, precise positions, accurate to degrees that should have been beyond the knowledge of any medieval astronomer. Some claim the charts were gifts, brought by travelers from far-off lands, but others whispered of gifts from somewhere far stranger. The Vatican locked them away, not destroyed, not denied, preserved, as if waiting for a time when humanity might be ready, or perhaps a time when the Church itself could no longer hide. Think of what that means. Someone or something had knowledge of the skies long before mankind. Knowledge offered not to all, but to a chosen few, hidden behind stone walls in Rome. Was it divine? Was it alien? Or were those two words never as far apart as we believed? Even today, astronomers who have studied copies of those star maps admit the alignments are uncanny. The accuracy is unsettling. And one detail rises above them all, a line drawn not between stars but toward us, a path that leads directly to Earth. What message lies in that path? Was it a warning, a promise, or a memory etched into parchment so that one day, when the veil was thin enough, humanity might look up and finally recognize the truth? The Vatican has never explained the maps. Perhaps it cannot, for to explain them would mean admitting the unthinkable, that contact may have happened not in the modern era, not in the 20th century skies, but in the very heart of our ancient faith. What does it mean when the oldest charts of heaven point not outward, but back at us? And if those maps were gifts, who were the givers, and why did they choose Rome? For centuries, the Vatican relied on a select order of men to watch the heavens. The Jesuits, priests as devoted to science as they were to God, became the church's quiet astronomers. By day, they studied the stars as proof of divine design, but by night, their journals whispered of something else. Hidden in coded Latin, buried in private notes never meant for public eyes, were accounts of lights that moved against the stars, objects gliding in silence across the sky, vanishing in ways no comet or planet could. One Jesuit wrote of a star that descended as if alive. Another recorded a glowing sphere that seemed to pulse with breath, hovering over a monastery before shooting upward into the dark. Were these visions of angels, or had the Jesuits glimpsed something far stranger, visitors who appeared not in stained glass windows, but in the night sky itself? The most unsettling detail is how carefully the Jesuits guarded their words. Rather than describing openly, they cloaked their sightings in metaphors, embedding truth beneath scripture. A streak of light became a flaming cherub. A hovering disk became a halo adrift. They wrote in a language safe enough for the church, but strange enough to preserve their terror. Whispers suggest the Vatican knew of these writings and chose silence. Why? Because even the most faithful astronomer cannot reconcile heaven's order with the chaos of unexplained visitors. If the stars were God's perfect clock, then what were these sudden intrusions? And then there is the strangest entry of all. In the late 1600s, one Jesuit's notebook contains a single sentence with no code, no metaphor, no cloak, just 4 Latin words, Ali knows observant. They are watching us. The words were underlined twice, then the journal ends. Did the Jesuit die before he could write more? Was his silence forced? Or was that one line all he dared to say, knowing it would echo through time like a warning bell? The Church has never confirmed the existence of these journals, but if even one is real, it means the Vatican's astronomers were not merely mapping stars, they were recording encounters. And they may have been the first priests not only to serve God, but to serve as chroniclers of something beyond this earth. If faith begins with testimony, what happens when the testimony belongs to the stars themselves? And if the Jesuits knew, what secret councils of power were formed to decide what mankind should never be told? In the shadowed corners of Vatican history, there is a name whispered more often than it is spoken aloud, the Black Pope. Not a rival pontiff, but the superior general of the Jesuits, a man said to wield influence so vast that even popes sought his counsel. Officially, his role was simple, guiding the Jesuit order. Unofficially, legends tell of something more. A secret council convened to debate not only the fate of souls, but the fate of humanity in the face of an alien question. Imagine a candlelit chamber in the late 16th century, walls heavy with tapestries, the air thick with incense. A table where no minutes are kept, no records signed. Here, priests and astronomers sat in silence as reports were read aloud. Glowing spheres above Rome, beings described in the margins of ancient manuscripts, whispers of contact too troubling to dismiss. Each testimony ended in the same heavy stillness, the kind of silence that means the unthinkable has already been accepted. What did they decide? Some accounts suggest the council concluded that humanity was not ready, that if the truth of these visitors ever surfaced, it would fracture the church, unravel kingdoms, and tear the faithful apart. Others claim they embraced another conclusion, that these beings were not a threat, but messengers meant to be interpreted through the lens of Scripture, angels under a different name. But the Black Pope was said to disagree. His rumored verdict was chilling. They are neither angels nor demons, and therefore they belong to no gospel. If true, that one line would explain centuries of silence. For what does a church do when confronted with something that falls outside heaven and hell alike? The Vatican has never acknowledged such a council, yet patterns in history suggest something was decided in those years. Strange sightings became cloaked in religious metaphor. Witnesses vanished into monastic silence, and Jesuit astronomers continued their work, but with an even heavier veil of secrecy. The idea lingers, perhaps the Black Pope and his secret circle shaped more than theology. Perhaps they shaped the very narrative humanity would inherit, carefully guiding what we could know and what we never should. If silence can be a doctrine, then who decides what must never be spoken? And if such a council once ruled in shadows, what vanished scripture did they hide to protect their choice? Among the most unsettling whispers in Vatican law is the story of a missing book, a gospel said to have once been part of scripture, quietly removed, sealed away, and forgotten by all but a chosen few. Some claim it was referenced in early church councils, others insist it was suppressed before the Bible was ever finalized. What made this gospel dangerous was not its theology, but its descriptions. The fragments, according to rumor, spoke of beings who descended from the heavens not clothed in light, but in fire. Beings who spoke without tongues, who moved without sound, and who left behind not miracles but knowledge, strange devices, glowing objects, and warnings of future cataclysms. The Church, faced with such words, could interpret them only two ways. Either they were blasphemy, or they were truth too terrifying for the faithful. To leave the book in Scripture would have invited chaos. To destroy it would have been to erase a message that perhaps God himself had allowed to be written. So instead, it is said, they chose a middle path, burial, a cosmic gospel hidden deep in the archives, locked away beneath Rome. Imagine, then, a single text that could change everything we believe about angels, about God, about the origins of Revelation itself. A book where angels might be visitors from the stars, where miracles might be misunderstood technologies, and where salvation might be written not only in divine blood, but in the language of the cosmos. Could such a gospel have survived? Some scholars point to strange gaps in early biblical records, letters that speak of other writings now lost, passages that suggest entire books vanished between drafts of the Holy Canon. And yet, in hushed Vatican corridors, archivists have been heard to say, not lost, only hidden. If true, it means our understanding of faith is incomplete by design, that the Bible we hold is not the full story, but the chosen story, and that somewhere, beneath stone and seal, lies a text that dares to connect heaven not with angels, but with something far older and far more vast. What happens when a gospel speaks of the stars instead of the cross? And if this gospel still waits in the vaults, what proof remains in our world that its words were never just metaphor? Throughout history, the Church has taught that angels are messengers of God, radiant beings of light who descend to guide, to warn, to protect. But hidden in certain Vatican reports and whispered testimonies is another version of the story. Encounters where the angels did not look like angels at all. One such account, never officially published, describes a night in Rome when witnesses saw a glowing figure descend above the Tiber. Cloaked in brilliance, it seemed angelic until it drew closer. Those who looked on swore its body was not robed in feathers but covered in a metallic sheen, reflecting the torchlight of the streets below. Its wings did not move. Its glow was not fire. And when it finally vanished, it did not ascend into heaven, but shot across the sky like a burning star. The witnesses were silenced. Some say the Vatican's own guard collected written testimonies, filed them in secret, and forbade further discussion. Yet one letter survived in fragments, passed down through families of the faithful. It describes the figure not as a messenger of God, but as a visitor cloaked in radiance, not of this world. If such accounts are true, then what were people really seeing across centuries? Were angels a language chosen by faith to describe something stranger, something human eyes could not yet understand? Or were there truly two kinds of visitors, divine and alien, blending together in our imagination? The Vatican has never clarified, but the silence speaks volumes. Because if some angels were not angels at all, then perhaps the Church has long walked a delicate line between revelation and concealment, protecting faith on one hand while guarding secrets on the other. Consider the effect this would have on history. A single mistaken identity, an alien mistaken for an angel, could change the trajectory of religions, shaping prayers, paintings, and even wars. Could entire doctrines be built on a misunderstanding of the stars? And yet, maybe misunderstanding was the point. Maybe these visitors wanted to be seen as angels, to enter our world not as invaders, but as messengers cloaked in forms we would accept. After all, how else could mankind have survived such a revelation centuries before it was ready? If an angel is simply what we call the incomprehensible, then how many of our angels were never angels at all? And if angels could be reinterpreted, what does that mean for one of the most famous miracles in Catholic history, the visions at Fatima? On the slopes of Mount Graham in Arizona, far from the crowded streets of Rome, stands one of the most curious outposts of the Vatican, an observatory. It is not cloaked in medieval stone, but steel and glass, its telescope peering into the cosmos with a precision worthy of any university in the world. To the outside, it is science in service of faith. But among those who whisper about the Vatican's hidden motives, this observatory carries another name, the eye of the Church turned toward the stars. The Jesuits who work there are highly trained astronomers, fluent not just in scripture, but in astrophysics. They map galaxies, chart exoplanets, and scan for signals. Officially, they search for truth about creation. Unofficially, some say they are looking for something else, something the Vatican already suspects is out there. And then there is the name. For years, one of the observatory's most advanced instruments bore an acronym so unsettling that conspiracy theorists still repeat it with awe. LUCIFER, a harmless title, the scientists said, standing for Large Binocular Telescope Near-Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. Just a coincidence of letters, just a name. But to others, it was a message in plain sight. Why would the Vatican, of all institutions, allow one of its instruments to be linked to the very name it has spent centuries casting as the enemy of heaven? Was it arrogance? Was it irony? Or was it a signal that the Church was no longer afraid of acknowledging that what they were watching in the skies might not be angelic? Even today, the Vatican Observatory insists its work is purely scientific, and yet its leaders have made strange comments. One director publicly said he would baptize an alien should one ever appear. Another admitted, "We may not be alone, and that does not threaten our faith." These words sound innocent enough, until you realize how unusual they are. How many scientists casually speak of preparing sacraments for extraterrestrial beings? Why would the Church place its eyes here, on a mountain, in the desert, under some of the darkest skis in the world? What exactly do they expect to see? Perhaps the answer lies in the silence between stars. Perhaps they already know what is coming. When the holiest city on earth turns its gaze upward, is it looking for God or for something else entirely? And if the Vatican is searching, then what did it know long before telescopes, back when visions of angels began to ripple through convent walls? In the quiet cloisters of 17th century Italy, a young nun named Maria Crocifissa della Concezione awoke from dreams that defied prayer. She claimed that angels spoke to her, yet their words were strange, unlike any language she had heard. One morning, her sisters found her in her cell, clutching a parchment covered in symbols and letters no one could decipher. To some, it was madness. To others, it was revelation. The Church preserved the parchment but never explained it. Centuries later, linguists attempted to decode the writing. Some suggested it was a mixture of ancient alphabets, others that it was the product of a disturbed mind. And yet, when run through modern algorithms, fragments revealed eerie messages, warnings about humans seeking the stars, about entities watching from afar, about the balance between heaven and the unknown. Coincidence? Or an encrypted message, one buried until humanity was ready to read it? Skeptics say the nun's visions were simply products of isolation and devotion turned inward. But why then would the Vatican keep her writings locked away for so long? Why guard the scribbles of a troubled soul as though they contained forbidden truths? Her story is not alone. Throughout Catholic history, nuns have reported visions not of Jesus or Mary, but of luminous beings descending in radiant light, of voices instructing them to prepare for a new creation. Often these accounts were dismissed, labeled as mysticism or hysteria. Yet the patterns are there: light descending, messages in unknown tongues, encounters that feel less like heavenly apparitions and more like contact. Imagine it, an isolated convent, the midnight bells tolling, and a sister staring up at the sky as if awaiting something. Was she waiting for God or for travelers from the stars? And what if Maria Crucifix's parchment was not a delirious scrawl but a transmission, a message written through her hand, encoded for a future she could not understand? If so, then the Vatican has been guarding a letter from the unknown for over 3 centuries. Sometimes the divine and the alien blur together. Sometimes visions are not of heaven, but of something else entirely. If a nun's dream could carry such a message, what would happen when entire towns claim to see heavenly visitors descending in daylight? Portugal, 1917. Tens of thousands gathered in a muddy field outside the village of Fatima, their eyes turned upward. Children had claimed that the Virgin Mary would appear, and so the crowd waited under a grey sky. Then, at noon, something impossible happened. Witnesses described the sun itself shifting, spinning, and throwing off colors like fire. Some swore it zigzagged through the sky, plunging toward Earth before retreating again. Others said their soaked clothes and the drenched ground dried instantly, as if some unseen heat had passed over them. The faithful called it a miracle, the miracle of the sun. The Church eventually canonized it as divine intervention. But skeptics and alternative thinkers saw something else: a mass UFO sighting centuries before flying saucers entered our vocabulary. Consider the details. The children's visions before the event described a luminous lady descending from the heavens, accompanied by strange light. On the day of the miracle, thousands saw aerial phenomena that defy physics. Some reported metallic reflections, others saw orbs within the light. Not everyone in the crowd witnessed the same thing, a hallmark, researchers later noted, of mass encounters with unexplained aerial phenomena. For the Church, Fatima became a cornerstone of devotion. Pilgrims still visit the shrine each year, praying to the Virgin who, they are told, revealed secrets of the world's future. But what if those secrets were not just prophecies, but warnings? The famous third secret of Fatima, hidden for decades in Vatican vaults, only fueled suspicion. When it was finally released in 2000, many claimed the version shown to the public was incomplete. Was the missing portion too disturbing to reveal? Did it speak of wars, or of something beyond this earth? The Church insists Fatima was purely a miracle, a confirmation of faith. Yet even some priests have quietly admitted that the descriptions sound eerily like modern UFO encounters. And if this was an encounter with something non-human, why would it disguise itself in the image of the Virgin? To comfort, to manipulate, or because humanity, in 1917, could only accept the extraordinary if it came clothed in holiness? Imagine standing there in the field, the sun spinning like a wheel of fire above you, heat rushing across your skin, your neighbors screaming prayers and falling to their knees. Would you call it God's hand or a visitation from beyond the stars? Perhaps miracles are not always divine. Perhaps some truths arrive wrapped in light, demanding belief without explanation. And if the sun itself could be seen as a messenger, what of the prophecies hidden deep within the Vatican, secrets written down but never fully revealed? Beneath the Vatican lies a labyrinth few will ever see, the secret archives, kilometers of shelving, manuscripts that trace back over 1,000 years, papal correspondence, state treaties, censored books, and locked dossiers that may never see daylight. To most, it is simply a treasure of history. To others, it is a vault of dangerous truths, truths too shattering for the world to know. Among the most whispered of these is the third secret of Fatima. The Vatican revealed parts of it in the year 2000, a vision of a bishop in white falling beneath gunfire, interpreted as the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. But many researchers and even clergy doubted the official release. The children of Fatima had described terrifying visions of fire, destruction, and entities not fully explained. Rumors swirl that the Vatican cut away portions that spoke not of war, but of beings from the heavens, and the upheaval their arrival would cause. Why censor prophecy? Why guard words said to be given by the Virgin herself, unless those words hinted at something far beyond the framework of faith, something that would destabilize centuries of doctrine? And Fatima is not alone. Locked within the archives are reports of other celestial visions, letters from missionaries describing flying wheels of light witnessed in South America, and accounts from Vatican astronomers who warned that our place in creation is not solitary. Officially, none of these exist. Unofficially, fragments have leaked, just enough to stir the imagination. The archives have always carried an aura of fear. In the 1960s, Pope John XXIII allegedly read a prophetic document about beings coming from space, predicting a time when humanity would face undeniable proof of their existence. Some say he was shaken by it. Days later, he reportedly told his advisors, "Prepare for soon the truth will no longer be hidden." Shortly after, he fell gravely ill. His words were never mentioned again. What if the Vatican's secrecy is not about power, but about survival? A world suddenly confronted with undeniable proof of non-human intelligence might fracture overnight. Religion, politics, science, all rewritten in a single breath. Perhaps silence is not denial, but containment. Still, silence can be more dangerous than revelation. For when truths are hidden too long, they breed shadows, and shadows feed suspicion. And if the Church is guarding prophecies about beings among the stars, one must wonder, who are they really protecting, the faithful or themselves? If the archives hold whispers of what lies beyond, then who inside the Vatican dares to speak of it openly? In the late 20th century, a quiet but brilliant Jesuit priest, Father José Gabriel Funds, became director of the Vatican Observatory. To the faithful, he was a scholar bridging faith and science. But to those who listened closely, his words carried a shockwave that still ripples through whispers today. In interviews, Father Funds said what no Vatican official had ever dared to say so plainly: the existence of extraterrestrial life does not contradict our faith. He went further, suggesting that beings on other worlds would also be God's creation, deserving dignity, even sacraments. He called them our extraterrestrial brothers. At first, newspapers treated his comments as quirky, almost charming. But soon, speculation grew. Why would a Vatican official, bound to careful language, speak so boldly about aliens? Was it a soft disclosure, a way to prepare humanity for knowledge long held in silence? Or was it a slip, an echo of something discussed behind closed doors in Rome? Inside Vatican circles, some whispered that Father Funds had gone too far. After all, he had not denied, not dismissed, but embraced the possibility of intelligent life. His statements were never retracted, yet he faded from public spotlight in the years that followed. Some say he was reassigned quietly, urged to return to research rather than interviews. But the timing was strange. His words came just as new telescopes began discovering exoplanets, worlds orbiting distant suns, some eerily similar to Earth. Scientists began speaking openly about the odds of other civilizations. Was the Vatican simply trying to get ahead of the inevitable? Perhaps Father Funds was chosen as a messenger, someone who could plant the seed without shaking the church's foundation. Or perhaps he was a priest who glimpsed too much through the lens of his observatory, compelled to speak even when silence was safer. Either way, his legacy remains haunting, for in one sentence, he shifted the Vatican's image from an institution guarding secrets to one hinting, ever so carefully, that humanity is not alone. When faith and science meet under the stars, sometimes the truth slips out, not as prophecy, but as a quiet confession. And if priests dared to hint at such truths, what happened to those who spoke not in careful words, but in fiery warnings about what the church was hiding? Not all voices within the church spoke with calm curiosity about life beyond Earth. Some warned with urgency, as if they knew that what hovered in the skies was not a brother, but a deceiver. Among these voices was Father Malachi Martin, a Jesuit priest, polyglot, and Vatican insider, who became infamous for his writings and radio appearances in the 1990s. Martin hinted that within the Vatican's highest circles, there was knowledge too unsettling to reveal to the public. In one interview, when asked why the Vatican was so invested in astronomy, he paused before replying, "Because of what's approaching us." He never clarified fully, but his words sent chills through listeners. Approaching us, not a metaphor, not a theory, something imminent. He described spiritual battles, cosmic in scale, suggesting that non-human intelligences might not be benevolent neighbors, but entities capable of deception. To him, they were not brothers from the stars, but powers that could masquerade as angels or saints, blurring the line between faith and manipulation. In his books, he hinted that secrets from Fatima and hidden prophecies pointed to this very danger. Critics dismissed him as dramatic, even paranoid. But Martin had been close to popes, translators, and scholars at the Vatican. He had handled documents most would never touch. Was he warning out of fear or out of knowledge? His warnings painted a darker possibility, that what the Vatican knew was not just about contact, but about infiltration. That what appeared as light in the sky might be something ancient, deceptive, even hostile. Shortly before his death in 1999, Martin gave one last cryptic statement. The world will soon witness a manifestation, one that will shock even the strongest of believers. He died suddenly, some say after a mysterious fall. His words remain suspended in the shadows he left behind. If Father Funds had offered comfort, speaking of alien brothers, then Malachi Martin offered dread, warning of cosmic wolves in sheep's clothing. And between those two voices, the Vatican remains silent, never clarifying, never correcting, only watching the skies. When a priest risks everything to warn of deception, we must ask, what enemy was so dangerous that he believed silence was the greater sin? And if warnings like Martin's shook the faithful, what did the Vatican itself do when sightings and secrets spread beyond priests, when governments, spies, and military men began knocking at Rome's door? The mid-20th century was an age of paranoia. East against West, spies against spies, nations stockpiling weapons powerful enough to erase the world. Yet behind the headlines of nuclear brinkmanship, another quieter war unfolded, a struggle to understand what was moving in the skies. Governments denied, classified, and concealed. But through it all, one unlikely player observed with almost invisible precision: the Vatican. The Church has always had its own intelligence networks, reaching into embassies, missions, and parishes across the globe. During the Cold War, reports filtered back not only of political unrest, but of strange lights seen over Siberia, over American deserts, and even near nuclear silos. Priests, missionaries, and bishops, people trusted by locals more than governments, sometimes became the first to hear of such sightings, and those reports did not vanish. They traveled back to Rome, quietly filed away, cross-referenced, and stored. Some historians claim the Vatican became an unofficial clearinghouse for UFO intelligence, a place where scraps of information could be pieced together beyond the reach of national agendas. Unlike Washington or Moscow, the Church did not have to answer to voters or premiers. Its silence was its strength. But silence does not mean ignorance. In the 1960s, when American and Soviet scientists nervously discussed the possibility of signals from deep space, rumors say Vatican observers were present. Whispers spread that the Church held transcripts, early detections of anomalous radio bursts, interpreted as possible communications. Nothing was confirmed, nothing was denied. Why would the Vatican care? Perhaps because faith thrives on certainty, and nothing unsettles certainty more than mysteries that refuse to vanish. Perhaps because if something greater than us was watching, the Church wanted to know before the world did. Or perhaps because secrets that belong to no nation must belong to someone, and the Vatican positioned itself as the quiet custodian of truths too destabilizing for governments to share. Imagine a priest in South America reporting a glowing disk skimming above a jungle village. Imagine the Vatican envoy forwarding the details in code to Rome. Imagine cardinals in high-ceilinged rooms reading not scripture, but military-style briefs about objects defying explanation. A church of altars and incense doubling as a silent intelligence service of the unknown. While nations feared each other, the Vatican may have feared something else entirely, the possibility that both sides were being watched by the same unearthly eyes. And if the Vatican collected whispers of the Cold War skis, what did it make of the chilling encounters that slipped through secrecy, the cases too public, too strange to be ignored? It was October 27, 1954, when a strange hush fell over a soccer stadium in Florence, Italy. Thousands of spectators stopped watching the match, their eyes drawn upward to the sky. High above the pitch, shimmering objects glided silently across the horizon. Some described them as glowing orbs, others as metallic shapes that seemed to shift as they moved. The crowd gasped, not in unison but in waves, as the shapes paused and hovered, then darted away with impossible speed. But the strangest detail came after. A fine, silvery substance drifted down from the sky, covering the stadium and surrounding streets. Witnesses picked it up. It clung to their fingers before disintegrating like ash. Scientists later tried to analyze samples. Some said it was spider silk carried on the wind. Others swore it contained elements inconsistent with anything natural. For decades, the incident remained one of Italy's most famous UFO encounters. And yet quietly, Vatican observers took note. Florence is a heartbeat away from Rome, and reports of the spectacle quickly reached clerical channels. One priest later admitted that bishops discussed the event with serious concern, as though it were not merely a curiosity but a sign. What unsettled them most was not the orbs themselves, but the behavior of the crowd. Thousands had seen it, too many to dismiss as illusion. For the Vatican, this posed a delicate problem. How should the Church respond if the heavens themselves appeared to act outside divine order? Was it miracle? Was it deception? Or was it something that theology had never accounted for? Silence became the safest answer. No official statement was made. But in Vatican libraries, reports of that day were filed alongside other aerial mysteries, catalogued not as miracles, but as phenomena. Decades later, researchers uncovered that similar angel hair substances were reported in other sightings across Europe, always after strange lights appeared. The connection deepened the mystery. If these events were natural, why did they always accompany objects in the sky? And if not natural, what intelligence was leaving these traces as calling cards? The Florence incident remains unsolved, but in Rome's shadow it lingers like a ghost. Tens of thousands witnessed something that no authority, governmental or religious, could explain. When the sky falls silent but leaves a trace behind, even faith must wonder, what message drifts in the ash of the unknown? And if strange objects hovered over Florence, what are the whispered reports that such lights appeared closer still, to the very heart of the Vatican itself? Rome has always been a city of visions, saints and martyrs, apparitions and miracles. But in the 1990s, something stranger flickered in its skies. Residents reported luminous spheres gliding silently over the Tiber, pausing above the Vatican dome before vanishing into the night. These were not isolated claims. Tourists with camcorders captured glowing orbs dancing above St. Peter's Square, their movements jerky, deliberate, impossible to mistake for planes. The Vatican itself never acknowledged the sightings, yet whispers spread that security officials had taken them very seriously. Guards stationed near the Apostolic Palace spoke of lights that behaved as if watching us. One even claimed, anonymously, that orders were given to track the phenomena but never report them to press. Silence, once again, became the shield. For the faithful below, the lights became a riddle. Was it a heavenly sign, a warning? Some knelt and prayed in the square as the orbs drifted overhead. Others pointed and filmed, their voices nervous, their hands shaking. To see the unexplained so near the center of Catholic power was unsettling enough. To realize that Rome itself could be under observation from something beyond Earth was far more disturbing. Researchers later uncovered similar reports dating back decades, strange glows over the Vatican archives, mysterious shapes hovering near Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer residence. Some dismissed them as satellites, meteors, atmospheric reflections, but others noted the precision, the way these objects seemed to hover, pause, and linger, as though waiting. And what of the Vatican astronomers themselves? Privately, some acknowledged awareness of the sightings. Publicly, they said nothing. To confirm would ignite a storm of questions. To deny would be a lie. So silence stretched on, filled only by rumors and grainy footage. Imagine it standing in St. Peter's Square at midnight, the cobblestones glistening after rain, and watching an orb of light float soundlessly above the dome, as if peering down on the heart of faith. Would you see a miracle or surveillance from the stars? If UFOs had crossed the skis of the Vatican itself, then the question is not whether the Church knew, but how much it dared admit. When the heavens above the Hulla city glow with strange fire, even silence becomes its own confession. And if lights above Rome unsettled the faithful, what happened when whispers suggested that deep within the Vatican walls, officials had already prepared for such arrivals? Behind the public rituals of incense and liturgy, the Vatican has long operated with a quieter kind of ritual, preparation. Hidden in its libraries and whispered among its scientists are rumors of documents outlining how the Church would respond if non-human intelligence were ever revealed. Not speculation, not wild theory, but protocols. Some accounts claim that during the Cold War, when governments drafted contingency plans for nuclear war and alien encounters alike, the Vatican quietly composed its own. These were not military instructions, but theological ones. How to explain contact to the faithful, how to baptize a being from another world, how to integrate the existence of extraterrestrials without dismantling centuries of doctrine. Hints of such preparation slipped out over the years. In 2009, the Vatican hosted a conference on astrobiology, gathering scientists from around the world. Officially, it was a scientific event. Unofficially, some saw it as a test to see how theologians and astronomers might converse about life beyond Earth without triggering panic. One priest was quoted as saying, "Our faith will not be shaken by the discovery of others. We are ready for what?" Rumors persist of sealed instructions, written by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, outlining a process of gradual disclosure, first acknowledging microbial life, then intelligent life, and finally, contact. Whether these documents exist is uncertain, but the idea itself speaks volumes. For why would a church prepare for something it believed impossible? Imagine the discussions in those marble halls. Cardinals debating not sin and salvation, but the ethics of interspecies communion. Jesuit astronomers asked whether baptism requires water or intent. Theological commissions pondering if Christ's sacrifice extended beyond earth, or if other worlds had their own covenants. These are not fantasies, they are questions the Vatican has admitted to asking. Skeptics say such protocols are nothing more than intellectual exercises, a way for scholars to pass time. But consider this, when the Vatican speaks of readiness, when its astronomers speak of extraterrestrial brothers, when its conferences quietly prepare theologians for new horizons, does this not suggest foreknowledge, or at least expectation? Perhaps the protocols exist not to answer if, but when. In a world unprepared for the unknown, the Vatican may already hold the script for humanity's first conversation with the stars. And if preparation exists, who within the Church first sounded the alarm, who warned that the skis were not empty, and that the faithful must be prepared for a truth unlike any sermon? Among the marble halls and gilded ceilings of the Vatican, popes have always spoken with measured caution. Yet every so often, a phrase slips through, a sentence that feels less like doctrine and more like a riddle. Some believe that, hidden between papal words, there have been hints that the Church already contemplates beings beyond earth. Take Pope John XXIII, who reigned in the early 1960s. Stories circulated after his death that he once claimed to have seen a glowing visitor in the papal gardens at Castel Gandolfo. The tale, dismissed by official channels, persisted in whispers, a figure of light, neither angel nor man, delivering a silent message. Was it legend, or an unguarded truth blurred into myth? Then there was Pope Paul VI, who quietly supported the Vatican Observatory's expansion during the space age, insisting that science and faith were not enemies. His words carried a weight that some interpreted as preparation. If new worlds reveal themselves, we must be ready to meet them as neighbors. He never elaborated. The line remains buried in speeches, a candle flickering in the archives. More recently, Pope Francis has spoken with disarming frankness. In 2014, he suggested he would baptize a Martian if one came to St. Peter's Square. Many laughed at the image, but his tone was not entirely playful. "Who are we to close doors?" he asked. The remark seemed offhand, yet carefully chosen, words that feel light until you realize their weight. Each pope faces the tension of two audiences, the faithful who need reassurance and the guardians of secrets who demand silence. Between them lies a delicate balancing act. A single slip could ignite a frenzy, yet too much silence risks suspicion. And so the popes speak in fragments, enigmatic half-statements, metaphors with edges too sharp to be accidental. Skeptics will say these are simply philosophical flourishes, harmless explorations of what if. But history teaches us that the Vatican seldom entertains hypotheticals without reason. If a pope, the most carefully scripted voice in Catholicism, mentions visitors from other worlds, might it not be because the possibility is already seated within the Church's private chambers? Perhaps these papal hints are breadcrumbs, not proof, but signals, not full revelations, but preparations. And perhaps, in the tapestry of Vatican secrecy, these hints are the only glimpse the public will ever be allowed to see. Sometimes truth is not declared outright. It is whispered in metaphors, veiled in humor, hidden in a single sentence meant to pass unnoticed. But whispers and riddles raise another question. What if the Vatican once faced undeniable evidence, an event so extraordinary that silence could no longer contain it. Hidden in the serene hills south of Rome sits the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical institutions in the world. Outwardly, it seems a peaceful place, telescopes peering into the heavens, Jesuit scientists logging data, scholars balancing equations with faith. But within these walls, stories circulate of one astronomer whose gaze may have lingered too long on the unknown. His name rarely appears in official archives. Some claim he was a Jesuit priest, others a visiting scientist. The details blur as if scrubbed deliberately. What survives are fragments, accounts from colleagues, whispers among Vatican staff that suggest he recorded something the Church did not want seen. According to the tale, one late night in the 1980s, he was working at Castel Gandolfo, charting faint anomalies near the edge of the solar system. Through long exposures, his telescope captured lights moving in ways no comet or satellite could explain. At first, he thought it error, a trick of the lens, but the data repeated, and then multiplied. His notes, later described by a fellow researcher, hinted at formations, patterns resembling fleets rather than random scatterings. The suggestion was clear: these were not natural phenomena, they were controlled, intelligent, and approaching. He shared his findings cautiously with a small circle. Within days, according to the story, Vatican officials intervened. His access to the telescope was restricted, his papers collected, and he was quietly reassigned to less sensitive projects. Soon after, he disappeared from academic references altogether. Some say he was sent abroad. Others whisper he was silenced more permanently. Of course, skeptics dismiss this as rumor, a ghost story for late-night conferences. Yet the timing is peculiar. In the late 1980s and early 90s, the Vatican Observatory began expanding its collaborations, opening branches in Arizona and engaging with global astronomy networks. Some see this as a coincidence. Others suspect it was a way to disperse sensitive observations, spreading the risk, cloaking discovery beneath the noise of international research. What makes the story endure is not the details, which are fuzzy, conflicting, but the silence. When asked about certain missing records, Vatican representatives decline comment. The observatory, usually proud of its history, grows quiet when the conversation turns to anomalous sightings. Silence itself becomes testimony. If one man did see too much, his fate remains hidden, but his legend lingers, like a shadow cast by the stars he studied. A warning, perhaps, that even the heavens are not free from earthly chains. What does it mean when the sky itself becomes classified? And if the Vatican silenced its own astronomer, what else? What other voices, testimonies, or sightings has it locked away in those endless archives beneath Rome? Castel Gandolfo is known to the world as the Pope's summer residence, perched above the shimmering blue of Lake Albano. Tourists see beauty, terraced gardens, cobblestone paths, and a palace that breathes centuries of history. But for those who have studied Vatican secrecy, Castel Gandolfo carries another reputation. Beneath the frescoed ceilings and manicured lawns are vaults, private archives said to contain records too sensitive for the Vatican Library itself. Some whisper that among those locked rooms are files connected to the observatory that once operated from the palace grounds. Logs of unexplained astronomical phenomena, sealed testimonies from astronomers who witnessed anomalies, and correspondences coded in language so vague they resemble scripture more than science. It is said these files are accessible only to a handful of curators, each sworn to silence under pain of excommunication. What makes the legend so persistent is the absence of transparency. When researchers request access to older astronomical records from Castel Gandolfo, they are told the documents are either misplaced, unavailable, or part of private collections not open to the public. In a church known for meticulous record-keeping, such gaps are difficult to explain. Were they destroyed or hidden? One story claims that in the 1970s, an archivist stumbled upon a folder marked with a simple Latin phrase, Creaturi Caelorum, creatures of the heavens. Inside, he allegedly found sketches of beings not quite human, tall, narrow, luminous. Alongside them were transcripts of interrogations, questions written in Italian and Latin, as if attempting dialogue. When the archivist mentioned the discovery to a colleague, he was warned never to speak of it again. Soon after he was reassigned, his access revoked. The folder, if it existed, was never seen again. Skeptics scoff at such stories, pointing out that any number of misplaced files could be sensationalized into myth. Yet consider this. In 2014, when the Vatican allowed limited public tour of Castel Gandolfo after Pope Benedict's retirement, visitors were shown only the grand halls and gardens. The lower levels, the archives, the subterranean chambers, remained off-limits, guarded as jealously as any treasure. If the Vatican's greatest secrets are hidden not in Rome, but here, in this quiet palace overlooking a volcanic lake, then perhaps the beauty of Castel Gandolfo is a mask for something older, stranger, and far more disquieting than summer retreats and papal rest. Sometimes the most serene places hide the darkest vaults. And if those files exist, sealed away beneath frescoed ceilings and marble corridors, who among the faithful or the curious has risked everything to glimpse them? Every institution has its cracks, and through those cracks sometimes slips a voice unwilling to remain silent. Within the Vatican, such voices are rare, silence is survival, yet every so often a whisper escapes. And once, not so long ago, it came from a priest who carried more than scripture in his conscience. He was known simply as Padre L, a Jesuit whose work placed him close to both the Vatican Observatory and the inner corridors of the Curia. Officially, he taught theology and philosophy. Unofficially, he had clearance to review certain classified documents, materials never meant to leave the vaulted walls of the archives. What he saw there troubled him. According to the fragments of his testimony that have surfaced, Padre L claimed to have read detailed reports of non-human intelligences, recorded as early as the 1940s, written in the careful, bureaucratic Latin of Vatican clerks. The files did not use the word alien. Instead, they spoke of entities not of Adam's line, described in clinical detachment, yet carrying undertones of awe and fear. He also hinted at transcripts of conversations, partly theological, partly scientific, where Vatican officials debated how such beings fit into salvation history. Could they sin? Did they require redemption? Were they perhaps closer to angels than men? Padre L suggested the debates were not hypothetical, they were urgent. Unable to reconcile his faith with what he had learned, he began confiding in a small circle of outsiders, researchers, journalists, and even a former seminarian turned skeptic. His accounts were fragmented, more suggestion than detail, but even these fragments were enough to ignite curiosity. The Church knows more than it says, he told one confidant, and it prepares for a revelation it fears. Shortly after these whispers spread, Padre L vanished from public life. Officially, he was reassigned to a quiet parish in South America. Unofficially, no one seems to know exactly where. His name was scrubbed from Vatican directories. His writings, never published, disappeared with him. What remains are the echoes of his warnings, circulating in the shadow networks of UFO researchers and conspiracy archives. Was he a fabricator, weaving tales from imagination? Or was he a rare insider who dared to breach the wall of silence, paying the price with exile? We may never know, but his story, like so many connected to the Vatican, carries a haunting resonance. For it suggests that not only are secrets kept, but that some within the Church suffer beneath the weight of carrying them. What burden does truth place on those sworn to obedience? And if one priest, risked everything to reveal fragments. What of those who chose loyalty instead, those who tightened the veil rather than lifting it? Every secret has its guardians. Within the Vatican, these guardians are not men with guns, but men with robes, titles, and authority sharpened by centuries of tradition. If whispers of otherworldly contact exist, then somewhere in the hierarchy are the figures tasked with ensuring those whispers never become shouts. These are the architects of silence, cardinals and monsignors whose names seldom reach the public, yet who pull levers within the curia like unseen hands. Their tools are not chains, but reassignments, not executions, but excommunications, not guns, but documents stamped, classified, and locked beneath stone. Their purpose is simple: to preserve stability, to keep the faithful from questions that could splinter doctrine. One name often surfaces in hushed speculation: Cardinal S., a figure whose tenure in the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was marked by a fierce defense of orthodoxy. He was rumored to have overseen the cataloguing of anomalous reports during the late 20th century, reviewing testimonies from priests and astronomers alike. According to one insider, his verdict was always the same: seal it, not for public eyes. Another is whispered only as the librarian, an archivist said to wield more influence than many bishops. His power lay in knowing which documents to misplace, which files to bury beneath centuries of parchment, and which inquiries to starve with silence. Some claim he once remarked, "Knowledge is not always meant for the flock. Some truths would tear the church apart." To outsiders, these guardians may appear sinister, keepers of forbidden knowledge. Yet from their perspective, they are protectors, preventing chaos. They believe they are defending the faithful from despair, shielding the fragile bond between faith and certainty from shattering under the weight of an alien revelation. Whether this is noble or tyrannical depends on where one stands. The architects of silence operate in shadows, their influence subtle but absolute. When a priest grows too curious, he finds himself transferred. When an astronomer hints at anomalies, his access narrows. When a document threatens to surface, it disappears into the labyrinth beneath the apostolic palace. And always, the story ends the same: silence. Perhaps silence is their sacrament, a ritual of omission practiced for generations. But silence cannot erase everything. Shadows may hide truth, but sometimes truth leaks through cracks, and when it does, the cost is borne not by the architects, but by the ones who dared to see. Silence on its own is fragile. To maintain it, one must watch. And so the Vatican, an institution often imagined as timeless and serene, has long been accused of wielding a quieter power: surveillance. Not the crude kind of secret police, but a subtler network of eyes and ears, tasked with observing those who wander too close to forbidden questions. Priests who asked too much about UFO sightings in their parishes found themselves shadowed by curious coincidences: letters intercepted, phones that clicked strangely, parishioners who suddenly withdrew, whispering that their shepherd had become troubled. In an institution where obedience is everything, such isolation can break a man faster than Excel. The Vatican's own security arm, the gendarmerie, is rarely mentioned in connection with cosmic secrets, yet insiders suggest that files exist, marked with innocuous titles, tracking those who showed unusual interest in celestial anomalies. One rumor tells of a young seminarian in the 1970s who compiled reports of lights over Rome, cross-referencing them with papal schedules. Within weeks, his work was confiscated, and he was quietly sent to a monastery far from Italy. His thesis, once praised, vanished from university records. Outside the clergy, lay researchers who pressed too hard on Vatican-linked phenomena often described similar patterns: anonymous warnings, lost correspondence, sudden scrutiny from local authorities. A journalist once claimed that after publishing an article linking the Vatican Observatory to UFO archives, he began noticing unmarked cars outside his home. The message was not subtle. Some doors were not meant to be opened. Of course, skeptics argue these are exaggerations, paranoia stitched into conspiracy. But is it truly so far-fetched? The Vatican is, after all, a sovereign state with its own intelligence channels, its own archives, its own police. If governments around the world surveil UFO researchers, why should the Holy See be exempt, especially if its own secrets are at stake? For those who lived under this watch, the experience was more than unsettling, it was suffocating. Faith itself became heavy when every prayer felt overheard, when every question carried a silent threat. To believe is one thing, to know is another, and for those who sought to know too much, the price was often loneliness, suspicion, and quiet ruin. What kind of truth demands such vigilance? And if the Vatican's eyes never sleep, then what of those who tried not only to speak, but to shout, those who attempted to publish what they found? Their fate would not be exile or silence, it would be erasure. History remembers what survives, but sometimes what vanishes tells the greater story. Within the Vatican's orbit, there are countless accounts of manuscripts, theses, and private testimonies that simply disappeared before the world could read them. Not destroyed openly, not burned in the public square, but quietly removed, erased as if they never existed. One tale centers on a 1950s theologian who drafted a daring paper suggesting that angels described in Scripture might, in fact, be accounts of non-human visitors. His argument was not hostile to faith, it was reverent, proposing that God's creation might be more expansive than imagined. Yet the work never reached publication. Before he could present it to his peers, the manuscript vanished from his study. He later confessed that men in clerical robes had visited him, urging him to abandon his dangerous speculations. Soon after, he left academia altogether, his career silenced by absence. In the 1970s, a Jesuit astronomer allegedly compiled a book-length treatise on anomalous stellar phenomena recorded over centuries by church observers. He intended it as a bridge between science and theology, a call for open dialogue. Weeks before printing, the publishing house withdrew, citing pressure from higher authorities. The only known copy, his draft, was never seen again. His colleagues, when asked, spoke in nervous half-sentences. It was not wise for him to pursue that line. Even in more recent decades, similar erasures occurred. A European journalist claimed to have gathered testimonies from priests in Latin America who witnessed strange lights over rural churches, lights accompanied by humming sounds and sudden power outages. Days before the exposé was to run, his files were stolen in a break-in. Oddly, nothing else was touched. Not money, not valuables, only his research. When he attempted to reconstruct it, his sources refused to speak, their courage dissolved by unseen pressure. These patterns are not isolated. Again and again, manuscripts disappear, testimonies dissolve, and trails end in silence. Skeptics will argue coincidence, bad luck, or personal paranoia. But how many coincidences does it take before silence itself becomes suspicious? The Vatican, after all, does not need to shout down voices. It needs only to remove a page here, a testimony there, a draft before printing. Over time, the world forgets what almost was, and the archives remain pristine, unblemished by revelations that never reached daylight. Sometimes the greatest stories are the ones we never get to read. But while manuscripts can be erased, memories cannot, and some of those who lost their work refuse to go quietly, carrying their warnings into whispered testimony that lives on to this day. Manuscripts can be erased, but living voices pose a greater challenge. People remember, they talk, they resist. And when words threaten to slip beyond the Vatican's grasp, history suggests another pattern, silence imposed not by ink, but by fear. Throughout the 20th century, scattered testimonies emerged from priests, archivists, even lay researchers, who claim to have stumbled too close to forbidden knowledge. Their stories share an eerie similarity: initial bravery, followed by sudden disappearance or retreat into silence. One priest in northern Italy, known for his fiery sermons, once told his congregation that the visitors among the stars are part of God's vast creation. Within weeks, he was reassigned to a remote parish in the Alps. Parishioners who sought him out later found a man transformed, withdrawn, cautious, speaking only in safe, scripted words. It was as though a fire had been extinguished inside him. Another case, often whispered in UFO research circles, tells of a Vatican archivist who claimed to have seen drawings of non-human beings within sealed files from the 1940s. He confided this to a journalist friend over coffee, admitting he felt watched. Days later, he died suddenly of what was reported as a heart attack. The journalist described receiving anonymous calls afterward, warning him not to pursue the story. Whether coincidence or design, the effect was the same: silence. Even outside the clergy, silencing seemed to reach. A South American bishop once spoke cryptically of celestial beings guiding humanity in unseen ways. After his statement drew international attention, he retracted it with unusual swiftness, insisting he had been misquoted. Those who knew him said the retraction sounded nothing like his voice, as if written for him. The methods of silencing were rarely dramatic. More often, they were suffocatingly subtle: reassignment, social isolation, discrediting a witness until no one listened. In some cases, sudden illness or accidents conveniently erased troublesome voices. Skeptics dismiss these as the randomness of life. Believers see a pattern too consistent to ignore. The cost was not only professional but personal. Families of silenced witnesses often recalled the toll: paranoia, late-night phone calls, cars parked too long outside their homes. Wives described husbands who no longer slept soundly. Children remembered fathers who stopped speaking of the stars. What greater power is there than to take a voice meant to proclaim truth and reduce it to a whisper, then to nothing at all? And yet, for every silenced witness, there is always one who resists, one who decides that exile, ridicule, or even death is worth the risk of telling the world what they saw. For most, the weight of Vatican secrecy is too heavy to resist, but every era seems to give rise to at least one figure who refuses to bow, who risks reputation, safety, and faith itself to speak a forbidden truth. Among the Vatican's hidden corridors, that figure became known only as the priest who would not bend. He was a man of deep faith, respected by parishioners, admired by fellow clergy for his compassion and eloquence. Yet behind his calm sermons lay an unshakable conviction that humanity was not alone and that the Church already knew it. Unlike others who whispered in private, he carried this belief into the pulpit. "The heavens declare the glory of God," he once said, "and within those heavens are neighbors yet to be revealed." The effect was electric. Some parishioners wept at the wonder in his words. Others reported him to his superiors. Within days, officials arrived with stern warnings. His words were dangerous, misleading, and potentially heretical. He was told to recant, to retreat into silence. Instead, he grew louder. He wrote letters, first to fellow priests, then to journalists, describing what he claimed were hidden archives detailing contact with beings not of Adam's seed. His writings were poetic rather than technical, but they carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had seen, or read, something forbidden. One letter ended with a haunting line: "I would rather fall in truth than stand in silence." The Vatican responded swiftly. He was stripped of his position, reassigned to a remote monastery where no audience could hear him. But exile did not silence him. He smuggled out pages, fragments of reflections that spoke of secret meetings between Vatican astronomers and government officials, of files marked with strange sigils he could not decipher. The fragments circulated in underground networks, copied and recopied until the originals blurred into rumor. Then suddenly, the trail ended. He vanished from public life, his name scrubbed from parish lists. Officially, he retired into contemplative seclusion. Unofficially, some say he fled abroad under another identity. Others whisper he was buried quietly in an unmarked grave. Yet his words remain, preserved in fragments. They surface in obscure journals, in late-night radio broadcasts, in the archives of UFO researchers who never met him but knew his defiance by the ink he left behind. Whether priest or prophet, rebel or martyr, his defiance stands as a rare breach in the Vatican's wall of silence, proof not of what he saw, but of the price he was willing to pay to say it. Some truths are worth exile, some whispers demand to be spoken, no matter the cost. But the Vatican's reach extends far beyond its priests, and those outside the church who stumbled too close to its secrets discovered that suppression takes many forms. Not all who sought the Vatican's alien truths were men of the cloth. Some were scholars, researchers, and academics, curious minds who followed faint trails through history, theology, and astronomy until they reached the church's hidden threshold. And then, like candles snuffed out mid-glow, many simply disappeared. One name recurs in whispers, Dr. Angelo Vieri, a linguist who specialized in ancient manuscripts. He was said to have been granted rare access to certain restricted Vatican texts, documents allegedly recovered from the Dead Sea caves but never released to the public. Within those brittle scrolls, he found references not to angels but to celestial visitors clothed in flame. Weeks after sharing his notes with colleagues, he vanished on a train journey from Rome to Florence. His luggage arrived at its destination. He did not. Another case, a Jesuit-trained astronomer, Father Matteo Romano. He lectured often about the possibility of other worlds, citing not only scripture but data from early telescopic surveys. At a conference in Argentina, he reportedly hinted at observing patterns in the sky that matched descriptions preserved in Vatican-held codices. 2 days later, his hotel room was found empty. No passport, no trace. His disappearance was attributed to personal crisis. His friends believed otherwise. There were others, a German historian who claimed to have found hidden diagrams of star maps embedded in medieval church art, a French archivist who wrote of a locked cabinet labeled extraterrestria, a South American scholar who, after publishing a provocative essay linking Marian apparitions to UFO encounters, fell silent forever. Skeptics argue these stories are exaggerated, coincidence wrapped in conspiracy. Academics vanish, they say, for reasons as mundane as illness, suicide, or simply walking away from their lives. But those who track the patterns see something more deliberate, a silken net tightening around anyone who pulls too hard at the Vatican's veil. The strangest detail is how similar the accounts feel. Family members recall sudden unease before the disappearances, strange phone clicks, shadowy figures watching from parked cars, warnings to leave it alone. In every case, the work left unfinished, notes confiscated, archives closed, lives erased from the trail. And yet fragments survive. A stray photocopy here, a second-hand recollection there, enough to suggest that these vanished scholars had uncovered pieces of something vast, something the church could not allow to surface unchallenged. The question lingers like smoke. Did they vanish by choice, by force, or by fate? Were they silenced, or simply taken somewhere their voices could never be heard again? When knowledge itself becomes dangerous, the pursuit of truth can become a death sentence. And if the church could silence its own priests and erase its scholars, what happened when governments, too, became entangled in the Vatican's alien archives? The Vatican has always projected itself as a spiritual authority, but behind its walls, the church has long acted as a quiet power broker. When it comes to the question of extraterrestrial secrets, This influence becomes almost invisible, yet unmistakable. For centuries, whispers suggest, governments and intelligence agencies have treated the Vatican not as a relic of faith, but as a silent partner in controlling the flow of forbidden knowledge. It begins with the archives. Within the sprawling, labyrinthine Vatican library are shelves and chambers that no scholar or priest may enter without special clearance. Rumors claim governments have been granted access, not to preserve the past, but to understand technologies and testimonies too dangerous to leave in religious custody alone. Declassified documents from the Cold War hint at this strange partnership. CIA cables describe consultations with clerical authorities on UFO-related intelligence, while Soviet accounts spoke of Vatican intermediaries quietly delivering reports of sky anomalies from South America to Moscow. Why would the Vatican be at the heart of this? The answer is disarming influence. Governments, however mighty, cannot easily dismiss the Church's centuries-old claim to moral authority. If priests, bishops, or Vatican scientists confirm alien encounters, the public might believe them before believing a general or a president. That trust makes the Church an invaluable gatekeeper. But such partnerships are not always smooth. In 1978, a confidential Italian parliamentary memo surfaced briefly before being buried. It described a dispute between Vatican representatives and Italian intelligence over the custody of recovered aerial debris from Sardinia. The Vatican allegedly insisted on moving the object into its custody, while intelligence officials demanded it remain under state control. The standoff ended in silence, yet weeks later, the Prime Minister himself was kidnapped in a case officially blamed on terrorists. Some conspiracy researchers still wonder, was the real motive something else entirely? Other nations, too, have been drawn into the Vatican's shadow. Latin American military regimes, grappling with waves of UFO sightings, often turn to Vatican envoys for interpretation. U.S. intelligence, facing the religious implications of contact, sought the Church's guidance on how disclosure might destabilize faith across the globe. In all cases, the Vatican remained quiet, careful, never officially confirming nor denying, yet always present. This silence creates its own suspicion. If alien secrets are real, and governments bow to Rome in handling them, who truly controls the truth? Is disclosure a matter of national security or spiritual monopoly? In the dance of power, sometimes the most silent partner leads. But wherever governments and the Vatican touched hands, another shadow followed, one made not of politics, but of fear. The watchers, the silencers, the ones who ensured that some truths never reached the light. Every mystery has its guardians, but in the case of the Vatican's hidden alien secrets, the guardians are not angels. They are shadows, watchers who appear only in the edges of memory, the corners of testimony, the unexplainable chills that come when someone realizes they are not alone. Researchers describe them in hushed tones. Black cars idling near apartment blocks for hours with no driver ever stepping out. Telephone clicks and static that vanish the moment the subject changes. A stranger in a crowd who always seems to look away when noticed, but reappears days later at a different corner. Those who pursued the Vatican's mysteries, priests, scholars, journalists, spoke of these watchers long before their lives unraveled. One former Vatican archivist, years after resigning, told a confidant, "I saw men who never wore cassocks, never prayed, yet always walked the halls. They did not read books, they guarded them." Days after the admission, he withdrew from public life, never to speak again. The phenomenon is not confined to Rome. In Mexico City, a researcher investigating Marian apparitions as possible UFO phenomena reported being followed home nightly by a silent man in a gray suit. In Argentina, a Jesuit astronomer described strangers watching him from the pews as he gave public lectures. In Washington, D.C., a journalist probing Vatican ties to UFO cover-ups said his notes were stolen in a break-in where nothing else was touched. Skeptics dismiss these as paranoia, the occupational hazard of chasing the unknowable. But the patterns are too consistent, the fear too specific. Even those who eventually abandon their investigations admit one thing: they felt watched. What's most unsettling is how invisible these watchers remain in official records. No arrests, no photographs, no proof beyond the shaken voices of the writers who claim to have seen them, as though it is as if they are new to Rome that does not exist on paper. Yet in one translated line, in reality, the document stated, "Were they visitors have conferred with us, government operatives, their presence must remain veiled, lest the flock scatter." Human only in another passage hinted at collaboration, secrets not meant agreements with secular authorities. Perhaps the Vatican needs watchers in exchange because silence cannot be trusted to maintain these lines as secrets. After all, are fragile but linguists pointed out something unusual. They tend to escape. The phrasing matched. If Vatican Latin protocols, why would the mid-20th century watch? A style nearly impossible for outsiders, and when a single hidden document found its way past the watchers, however, it revealed a secret drawn in the margin, tear the veil by a hurried hand. Was the outline of a figure. It began with a single page, with an elongated skull and eyes far too large for its face. That bore both papal seals and markings no scholar could identify. Guardians. The document surfaced. Those who studied the early 1980s its meaning, smuggled out by an anonymous source who claimed it had been a mistranslations restricted, or a glimpse into the church's most guarded truth. It vanished, scrubbed they had libraries, others seized from journalists, perhaps reduced to rumor, and had formalized, but not before fragments were read, photographed, officially, and the Vatican never acknowledged the document's existence. The page was not a theological when journalists text inquired, it was a memorandum. Ranged from dated to the late 1940s, quiet refusals. It described a celestial encounter of non-terrestrial origins found themselves in Italy near the close of World War I. Files disappeared. More chilling, one researcher claimed that his car was forced off the road by unmarked vehicles shortly after attempting to publish his analysis. Today, only a handful of blurry reproductions circulate online. Most are incomplete, fragmented, degraded to the point of uselessness. And yet, the story endures, because the language, the seal, the sketch all feel too strange to be fabricated, too precise to be meaningless. Sometimes, the most terrifying proof is not the volume of evidence, but the single page that should never exist at all. And if such a document could slip through, what else might lie hidden in the Vatican vaults? Sealed records of encounters, not just with beings in the sky, but with something even more unsettling. Beneath the golden chapels, beneath the marble halls where pilgrims walk in reverence, lies a world few ever imagine. Rome is a city of layers, its past stacked in stone and shadow, but under the Vatican itself, there are whispers of vaults so deep, so secret, that even cardinals do not know their full extent. It is here, some say, where the true alien archives are buried. The official Vatican library is vast, yes, over 30 miles of shelving, manuscripts stretching back more than a millennium. But what most visitors never realize is that the library they see is not the library that matters. Rumors speak of lower chambers, doors locked with mechanisms centuries old, accessible only to a handful of guardians sworn to secrecy beyond death. There are even claims of hidden elevators descending beneath the apostolic palace to levels where light itself feels reluctant to linger. Stories of these vaults stretch across time. In the 17th century, a French diplomat wrote of being led by torchlight into a subchamber where scrolls were chained to stone walls. In the 20th century, an Italian maintenance worker swore he discovered a sealed stairwell beneath the library, its entrance closed by a bronze gate adorned with celestial symbols he could not decipher. Days later, he was reassigned and never spoke of it again. What might these vaults hold? Some imagine ancient manuscripts describing encounters from biblical times, accounts of beings who descended not as angels, but as visitors clothed in light. Others suggest artifacts, fragments of craft, relics not of this earth, preserved in silence beneath Rome's holy ground, and still others whisper of records more disturbing still, agreements, correspondence, even photographs never meant for human eyes. The strangest claims come from those who say the vaults hum, that within certain chambers there is a low vibration, a resonance in the stone itself, as though the vaults are not simply storing secrets, but containing them. One folkloric tale insists that the deepest level houses not documents at all, but a sealed chamber, guarded day and night, where something alive waits in silence. Whether myth or memory, the imagery lingers, endless shelves of forbidden texts, locked drawers holding sketches of impossible beings, boxes marked with seals older than nations, and always the sense of something withheld, not out of ignorance, but by deliberate choice. What kind of faith requires secrets so heavy they must be buried in stone? Yet as the centuries advanced, those vaults did not remain untouched. Whispers tell of secret visits, powerful outsiders ushered below Rome's surface, given glimpses of what humanity was never meant to see. For centuries, the Vatican's deepest vaults remained sealed to all but its most trusted guardians. But there are whispers, rare, unsettling, of moments when outsiders were led into those hidden chambers, not priests, not cardinals, outsiders, men of power, science, and secrecy, granted glimpses of truths that ordinary believers would never be allowed to imagine. One tale speaks of a meeting in the aftermath of World War II. A handful of American officials, shaken by strange phenomena in the skies, traveled to Rome not for faith, but for knowledge. Behind closed doors, they were escorted beneath the apostolic palace. What they saw has never been written with certainty, but one surviving account claimed they left pale, shaken, and wordless, carrying with them not relics, but an understanding. The Vatican had been guarding something far older than Roswell. Another story, buried in the memoir of a retired Italian diplomat, describes a scientist, unnamed, who was taken below to study a fragment of non-human metal. The fragment, he wrote, was impossibly light yet indestructible, inscribed with patterns resembling language. He was given only 2 hours in its presence, after which it was locked away again. When he attempted to publish his findings years later, his manuscript was rejected, his name discredited, his reputation dismantled. He died alone, insisting to the end that he had seen the language of the stars. Even more chilling is the rumor of papal audiences with astronauts. Some believe that before humanity's first ventures into space, select cosmonauts and astronauts were briefed not only by their governments, but by Vatican officials. If true, it suggests the Church considered space exploration less a scientific frontier and more a step into an already occupied territory. Did these astronauts know they might encounter others? And if so, what did the Vatican tell them? Perhaps the most haunting story involves a world leader, a president who, during a state visit, was secretly shown a relic said to belong to those not born of Earth. The relic was described as a preserved object, neither biological nor mechanical. Something in between. Whether he believed it or not remains unclear, but his speeches in the years that followed took on a strange urgency, as though he carried a burden too great to name. If these accounts hold even a shred of truth, they suggest the Vatican does not merely hide its knowledge, it chooses who may taste it, who may walk away carrying a fragment of the unbearable secret. And yet, each of these outsiders, though altered, remains silent, perhaps by fear, perhaps by choice, perhaps by design. Some doors open not to invite, but to warn. But while a chosen few were shown glimpses, the world at large was offered something different. Visions in the sky, apparitions cloaked in holiness, mysteries that blurred the line between the divine and the extraterrestrial. For centuries, the Catholic world has been shaken by apparitions, visions of radiant figures in the sky, speaking in voices of compassion or warning. Fatima lured Guadeloupe, names etched into the hearts of millions as holy sites of divine contact. But beneath the hymns and candles, another question lingers, whispered by those who dare. Were these apparitions truly divine, or were they something else? The events at Fatima in 1917 remain the most haunting. 3 children described a luminous figure descending from the heavens, speaking messages of prophecy and warning. Tens of thousands later gathered in the fields, watching as the miracle of the sun unfolded, an orb of light spinning, dancing, and plummeting toward Earth before snapping back into the sky. To the faithful, it was the Virgin Mary. But to UFO researchers, the descriptions are chillingly familiar. Glowing craft, light phenomena, and witnesses reporting physical effects, heat, blindness, even burns. Lourdes tells a similar story. In 1858, a poor French girl claimed to encounter a lady clothed in white, bathed in a glow too intense to describe. The girl's words were treated as holy testimony, yet skeptics note that the figure communicated without moving her lips, that her presence was accompanied by strange electromagnetic sensations, and that her light was so overwhelming it seemed less like a vision and more like an encounter with advanced technology. At Guadeloupe in 1531, the apparition left behind something even stranger, a physical imprint on cloth, depicting an image that defied analysis. Centuries later, studies revealed pigments and fibers that baffled scientists, as if the imprint was not painted by hand but burned into existence by a form of energy still unknown. The Vatican has always treated these apparitions as spiritual mysteries, recognizing some, rejecting others, guarding them with theological caution. Yet researchers point out the overlap with modern UFO reports. Beings of light who descend from the sky, messages of peace or warning, physical phenomena witnessed by crowds, objects that manipulate light in impossible ways. If these events are truly divine, why do they so closely resemble encounters with others? And if they are extraterrestrial, why would they choose to appear under the guise of the sacred? Was it a disguise meant to soothe humanity, or is the sacred itself part of a deeper cosmic truth? The faithful kneel at these sites in prayer. The skeptics sift through witness accounts and atmospheric anomalies, and the Vatican, as always, maintains silence, perhaps knowing that in these apparitions lies a truth too dangerous to name outright. What if the faces we call holy are masks worn by something far older, far stranger than we imagine? And if the apparitions were not just visions, but messages, then somewhere in the Vatican's vaults, their full transcripts may exist, locked away, guarded, never meant for the public. Few mysteries have ignited such debate, fear, and speculation as the third secret of Fatima. Of the 3 prophecies delivered to the shepherd children in 1917, 2 were revealed within decades, but the third was locked away, hidden in Vatican archives, sealed in an envelope that only the highest levels of the church were permitted to open. Why? The answer, as always, may be darker than the faithful were prepared to hear. The first 2 prophecies spoke of war, suffering, and the spread of atheism across the world, grim but comprehensible. The third, however, was said to be so shocking, so destabilizing, that the Vatican kept it concealed for over 80 years. Popes read it, some wept, some prayed in silence. One, John XXIII, reportedly muttered after reading it, "This is not for our time." In 2000, the Vatican finally released what it claimed to be the text, a vision of a bishop in white, the Pope himself, walking through a ruined city filled with corpses, only to be struck down by soldiers. A grim allegory, perhaps, of persecution and suffering, but many were unconvinced. The account seemed symbolic, sanitized, missing the raw terror that earlier leaks had suggested. Because whispers persist that the true third secret spoke not of earthly war, but of cosmic revelation. According to some reports, the prophecy warned of a great unveiling, of beings descending from the skies, and of the crisis this would unleash upon faith. The shepherd children, uneducated and poor, described them as angels, yet their words, carefully recorded, may have hinted at something more: luminous visitors not of this earth, delivering warnings that humanity would one day face. Even more unsettling are claims that the secret contained a date, a specific year when the great trial would begin, tied to heavenly signs. Some alleged that popes carried this date with dread, shaping their actions, their silences, their calls for prayer. Whether the date has already passed, or lies still ahead, remains the question that haunts those who search for the truth. Why hide such a message? To preserve faith, perhaps, to prevent panic, or because the Vatican feared that admitting the prophecy's true content would shatter its authority, merging the sacred with the extraterrestrial in a way it could not control. To this day, scholars and believers argue, was the Vatican's 2000 release the real third secret, or a carefully crafted substitute? Did the Church withhold the words that pointed not to heaven, but to the stars? Sometimes the most powerful secret is not what is revealed, but what is omitted. And if the third secret was edited, hidden, or buried, what other Vatican prophecies, sealed in vaults, unread by the world, remain waiting for the moment humanity is deemed ready? Fatima may be the most famous, but it is far from the only prophecy the Vatican keeps sealed in shadow. Across centuries, mystics, saints, and visionaries have claimed to receive messages from beyond, some divine, others terrifying, many carefully documented by the Church. Yet a significant number of these accounts never saw the light of day. They remain hidden, locked in drawers and vaults, too dangerous or too revealing for the faithful to read. Take the prophecies of Padre Pio, the Italian mystic who bore the stigmata. He wrote of heavenly beings not born of man, who would one day walk openly among humanity. Though his words are known in fragments, scholars insist much of his writing remains unpublished, stored in Vatican custody. Why would the Church, which canonized him, withhold portions of his visions, unless they intersected with something the Vatican has no interest in confirming? Or the chilling visions of Sister Lucia, one of the Fatima children who lived long into the modern age. She was said to have written further prophecies beyond the third secret, describing future upheavals and strange lights in the firmament that would confuse and terrify mankind. Some of her later letters are mysteriously missing, preserved only in Vatican archives. Then there are lesser-known mystics. The 17th century nun Maria of Agreda, who claimed luminous figures guided her to knowledge she could not have otherwise known, or the 19th century stigmatist Anna Katharina Emmerich, who spoke of worlds upon worlds filled with life. Were their visions purely symbolic, or were they glimpses of cosmic realities framed through the language of faith? The Vatican has always justified secrecy with the same reasoning: to prevent confusion, to guard against hysteria, to preserve doctrine. But the pattern is unmistakable. When a prophecy speaks only of sin and salvation, it is shared. When it hints at something larger, something that touches the stars or visitors clothed in light, it is hidden. What does the Church fear? Perhaps that the line between divine revelation and extraterrestrial encounter is thinner than we dare admit. Perhaps that saints and seers were not simply vessels of heaven, but witnesses to a broader universe reaching down to touch humanity. The sealed prophecies remain in darkness. Their contents, we are told, are for another time. But whose time, and who decides when the truth becomes bearable? Secrets are not only about the past, they are warnings to the future, waiting for the right moment to be unsealed. And as the present collides with the future, UFO leaks, military admissions, whispers of contact, the Vatican's long-buried prophecies begin to feel less like warnings and more like revelations already unfolding. The Vatican's secrets may lie in locked vaults, but the world outside is catching up. What was once whispered only by mystics or hidden in papal archives, now echoes across television screens, government hearings, and declassified files. The forbidden language of the stars is breaking free. Consider the U.S. Navy pilots whose cameras caught metallic objects defying physics. Their testimony, calm, professional, undeniable, resonates with the same eerie patterns once described by Jesuit astronomers centuries earlier. Or the recent admissions by intelligence agencies that unidentified aerial phenomena are not merely weather balloons, but something unknown, something beyond. Each revelation feels like a stone pried loose from the Vatican's walls, confirming what prophecy and secrecy have long implied. Yet the Vatican remains silent, issuing no comment, no denial, no explanation. Perhaps they believe silence is safer than truth, or perhaps silence is the truth, for if disclosure ever comes, it will not just challenge science, it will shake faith, rewrite theology, and blur the line between angel and alien. Still, the echoes persist. Whistleblowers step forward, their voices trembling with both fear and relief. Families whisper of abductions, of strange lights hovering over their fields, of dreams that feel more like visitations. Ordinary people, teachers, pilots, doctors, describe encounters that match the language of ancient mystics. Are they all mistaken, or are they unwitting heirs to a reality the Vatican has always known? And then there is you listening now, drifting in the quiet hours of night, caught between waking and sleep. You have followed the trail through history, through vaults and visions, through whispers and prophecies. Perhaps you feel the weight of something vast pressing close. Perhaps you sense the unspoken truth that we are not alone and have never been. So what happens when the final vault opens, when prophecy and disclosure collide? Will the Vatican finally admit what it has hidden, or will the truth slip past them, carried instead by the voices of those who dare to speak? In the end, maybe it doesn't matter, for secrets cannot remain buried forever. They echo across time, across cultures, across generations, until they are heard. And if you listen closely enough, even in the silence of night, you may realize the echo is already here. The Vatican's hidden alien secrets are not just history. They are prophecy, still unfolding in a world that is only now beginning to awaken.